Happiness was 1989 in my rearview mirror. It's the best of NES 89 in this special episode of NES Works.
Let me tell you the story of right hand, left hand.
As usual, the NES release year has come to an end, more or less, and there's a lot of groundwork to do here to cover the highlights. 89 was packed. This could be recency bias speaking, but I was really impressed by Kings of the Beach, Konami's conversion of a computer game and one of the few 8-bit sports team-based titles that actually works. The biggest reason it didn't make my final 12 really just comes down to the fact that it didn't originate on NES, and I kind of feel like the best of the best for NES sports should have been created specifically for the system. To Konami's credit though, Kings of the Beach absolutely feels like it could have been designed for NES. They did a great job of picking a computer game that had a strong console-like sensibility to begin with, and giving it an overhaul that brought it fully into line with the rest of Konami's lineup for the console. The visuals, animation, and music all feel, well, Konami-like in the best way. And the high degree of automation and computer assists take the annoying guesswork out of the action, allowing you to focus on timing and, if you take advantage of the 4-player control setup, coordinating with your teammate. There were a lot of volleyball games in the late 80s and early 90s, but Kings of the Beach earns its crown. I still can't get over the fact that Super Dodgeball was the first true sequel to Renegade to ship in the US. I mean, not that any of us knew that it was a canonical follow-up to that game, since Super Dodgeball was only slightly tweaked for localization, rather than comprehensively overhauled the way Renegade was. It didn't matter. Super Dodgeball works great on its own merits, a sports game that barely bothers with the fair spirit and rules of the competition in favor of basically being a brawler game with projectiles, which it kind of was. Super Dodgeball puts a lot of characters on the screen at once, and maintains a seriously brisk pace. The NES can barely keep up, but it does, and the whole thing is just a wild-eyed good time as you attempt to bean opponents with a medicine ball while doing your best not to be knocked out of the action yourself. Throwing a ball back and forth is all well and good, but Super Dodgeball puts a more video game-like spin on things, literally. You can toss spin balls, fastballs, power shots, and more. Likewise, so can the opposing team. Your chunky little cartoon guys all look distinct, and they each have distinct traits and abilities to match, and that holds true for every team. Super Dodgeball manages to bring a lot of variety and depth to the simple act of chucking a ball back and forth across the court. It imbues the whole thing with a ton of personality as you battle a host of international teams across international settings. This series scattered publishing rights on NES. Taito published Renegade, Sony's newly minted US Games division published this, Tradewest would publish River City Ransom, etc., meant that kids had to deduce the connection between these similar-looking but wildly different games, all on their own. But we were smart kids. We knew something was up, especially since they were usually great games on par with this one. I was horrified to learn that most people do not like Godzilla, Monster of Monsters. How can so many of you kind-hearted folks be so wrong? In fairness, I'll admit that Godzilla didn't really do much for me back when I first played it, at the time of its original debut. But now, being older and wiser and better versed in Godzilla, I can appreciate the fact that it does in fact kick ass. Godzilla opens by presenting itself as a hex-based strategy game in which you move Godzilla and Mothra around a map and attempt to intercept other kaiju. It's not really a strategy game though. You have no base to defend, no resources to gather, and no strongholds that actually need conquering until you reach Planet X, where the alien invaders make their headquarters. The hex setup simply determines how quickly each of your monsters reaches the teleport to the next world. Literally, next world, as you move from planet to planet, and which bad guys they'll fight along the way. Godzilla and Mothra fight very differently, with the massive Godzilla tanking damage as he slugs his way through the enemy hordes, and the more fragile Mothra playing keep away while attempting to deliver deadly cascades of her wing toxins. Both characters gain experience and level up as they advance, which is good because facing off against enemy kaiju can be a short, sad affair for an underleveled monster. Godzilla isn't a flawless masterpiece, but developer Compile clearly approached this game from a place of love and delivered a far more robust licensed title than they really needed to. And that rules. I met a guy at Midwest Gaming Classic a few weeks ago who's been collecting Dragon Warrior cards. Kind of like that Japanese blogger who took a bath in Moero Pro Yaku cartridges all those years ago. Nintendo overestimated the performance of this one pretty badly, and Dragon Warrior was not the massive hit that they expected it to be, ultimately forcing them to give away copies of the game as magazine subscription incentives. That is not a reflection on the quality of Dragon Warrior, aka Dragon Quest, more a reflection of the desperately poor timing of its American release. When it shipped in Japan in 1986, Dragon Quest served as a brilliant template for developers who wanted to put role-playing games on consoles, which was basically all of them, and they did. A lot of those Dragon Quest-inspired games reached the US before Dragon Quest was localized as Dragon Warrior, which meant that we already had a pretty good grounding in the tenets of RPGs by then. Which meant that this foundational work, which amounted to a very rudimentary RPG 101 introductory course, felt pretty stale and simplistic in late 1989 compared to the mini RPGs and action RPGs that leapfrogged it for localization. No wonder no one bought it. I mean, relatively no one. Anyway, if you look past all of that baggage, what you have in Dragon Warrior is a really solid, if simple, turn-based RPG. Quest structure is profoundly simple, involving a small chain of quests leading up to the rescue of a princess, which then leads to a slightly less small chain of quests to acquire the tools to defeat the Dragon Lord who sets up camp across the river from the castle where you began your adventure. It's all very basic and requires a lot of searching and wandering for objectives, but combat and its difficulty curves are nicely balanced, the world was built thoughtfully, and the game always feels a bit challenging but never overwhelming. Dragon Warrior directly inspired better, deeper, more complex games, but that doesn't diminish the significance of what it accomplished. Monster Party by Human Entertainment and Bandai feels like the kind of game that only shipped back in the day in Japan and became an importer legend and a popular favorite among fan translators. But no, Monster Party only shipped in the US and never had a Japanese release. That's weird, right? Certainly Monster Party is weird, in all the best ways. A surrealistic, almost nightmarish adventure in which a school kid teams up with a demon to battle through stage after stage of Japanese yokai and thinly veiled Hollywood references. The entire game feels like it's trying to dodge legal entanglements the entire time and only just succeeding. It's kind of limited in its design. You can't transform between your human form, Mark, and demon aspect, Bert, totally at liberty. But each character plays differently. The scarcity of transformation opportunities forces you to improvise and figure out how to face each boss and mini-boss with the skills you happen to have at hand. If we're being honest, it's actually a pretty messy game. It's possible to softlock your progress in the final world if you're not careful. But it's so gleefully strange and loaded with personality that I can't find it in my heart to take those flaws as faults. Capcom was on some next level stuff in 1989, and Willow offers a case in point example. A very different game than the arcade platformer by the same title, Willow instead plays very much like a take on the original Legend of Zelda, but beefed up with role-playing systems and mechanics. Technically, that also describes Zelda 2, except that was more like the Willow arcade game. This is a top-down action RPG with overhead swordplay plus spells, items, and weapons to collect. Based somewhat faithfully on the movie, Willow undeniably gets one thing right. Willow is no burly hero capable of taking on all comers. He starts the game as a humble farmer and has to earn his way to the final battle with the evil Bavmorda. And you really feel the strain of that journey when you attempt to use a sword that's way too powerful for Willow to wield and do 0 damage to a monster as it bludgeons your face in. Overall, the game is pretty basic as such things go, though not as basic as Neutopia. But given the scarcity of this style of game on NES, despite how much the original Zelda sold, it stands out simply for existing. The fact that it's actually pretty damn good is a welcome bonus. port of a game that debuted on Macintosh, Shadowgate enjoyed an even more transformative NES adaptation than Kings of the Beach. In fact, for the most part, this version has superseded the Mac original in the annals of video game history. Part of that has to do with the fact that it reached a much larger audience on NES than the Mac could deliver. Tens of millions of players versus a few million. But also, the fact that developer Kemco did a fantastic job of retooling the game to work on consoles. The interface adapts a mouse and keyboard-based setup to work with the NES's 2 buttons and D-pad, and it does so in a way that manages to be both elegant and intuitive. You can easily switch between free cursor movement and snap to selections, which makes paging between the submenus of your inventory as painless as one could imagine on NES, while allowing you to easily point and click on the map icon window and make quick selections in the main window where you examine the current environment. Shadowgate features a lot of puzzle solving and a lot of untelegraphed deaths. But it manages not to feel frustrating because of its generous auto checkpoint system that minimizes the time you lose when you die. The reduced friction with which you face the game's gleeful bloodlust goes a long way toward turning those cheap deaths from an infuriating waste of time to a fun, they got me again addition to the adventure. Is Baseball Stars the best NES sports game of 1989? I think so. Tecmo Bowl almost made the cut, but looking ahead at the future, I feel that Tecmo Super Bowl does a better job of representing that sport in 8-bit form. When it comes to baseball, though, nobody did it better on NES than SNK. At its heart, Baseball Stars plays a mean game of baseball. You can pick pre-made teams or roll your own, with unusually diverse options. You can even field mixed-gender teams. The real magic of Baseball Stars, however, comes into effect when you start tinkering with career play and roster customization. You can customize your lineup, trade or hire players, and save all of your progress to the battery-backed cart for long-term persistence. That's the sort of thing you really only saw on home computers at the time. But Baseball Stars brought career play to console, and it looked and sounded as nice as it played. Really just a standout title, and that's coming from a man who feels existential disappointment weigh on his soul anytime a sports title appears on the upcoming release list. This one's almost another computer game, except that it's not. From what I've read, Nihon Falcom wanted Faxanadu to be a home port of their computer mega hit Xanadu, that is, Famicom Xanadu. But Hudson had other ideas and created something that was almost, but not completely, entirely unlike the original Xanadu. Whatever, who cares, it's great. The Xanadu takes place entirely inside the Great World Tree, which is dying from the poison that a meteorite has introduced into the water supply. You, a traveler, must make your way through the branches and foggy interior of the tree, buying gear and spells in town and slugging it out in hostile fortresses overrun by dwarves who have transformed into monsters due to the meteor's poison. The Xanadu seems to have taken a lot of influence from Zelda 2, marrying platform-based combat to RPG experience systems and progression, and emphasizing deliberate swordplay. It's also very distinctly its own thing, a game as self-contained and unique as the environment it takes place in. The murky brown and gray of Faxanadu's world becomes almost oppressive at times, though it does make for a game that looks unusually detailed on NES. Hudson's graphic designers made great use of the NES palette, building a sense of oppression into the world that enhances the bare-bones story in small ways. It's probably not one for the masses, but God bless Nintendo for picking it up to localize alongside Dragon Warrior all the same. DuckTales, on the other hand, is very much one for the masses. Capcom set out to make an action game suited for the tweens who enjoyed the Disney afternoon cartoon, and they absolutely nailed it. DuckTales is a short game, and aside from a few tricky jumps in the Amazon caves, it's pretty easy too. But that is exactly as it should be. DuckTales brings Scrooge McDuck to life quite faithfully. No guns here, just an old man hopping around on his cane. You can't even use Scrooge's golf swing to hurt foes, only to smack walls and bricks to make treasures appear. It looks great, it sounds fantastic, and it neatly condenses the DuckTales experience into a short, sweet little adventure based around controls and gameplay that are just complex enough to make kids feel like they've really accomplished something once they get the hang of it. Who the hell said games for kids had to be dumbed down and shoddy? Whoever that was is a real bozo. Make them play DuckTales. At the opposite end of the difficulty scale from DuckTales, we have Ninja Gaiden. Ninja Gaiden is not easy. It is not a game that children are likely to master with little trouble, and that is okay too. Some have likened Ninja Gaiden to Castlevania, in that it centers on precision control and a high degree of memorizing the placement of enemies within a stage. Plus, its levels consist of 3 substages and a boss. Oh, and also, it's super hard. This is a far faster game than any classic Castlevania though, as befits protagonist Ryu, a ninja. He is tiny and nimble, which only seems fair given that his enemies vastly outnumber him, attack from all angles, and respawn infinitely if you scroll back and forth, or even push their spawn points to the edge of the screen. Ryu normally attacks with a short-range sword, but he can also acquire secondary ninja magic skills that burn through spirit points when used. Like, Castlevania. But Ninja Gaiden offered a carrot at the end of that cruel stick: cutscenes. This was something new to action games at the time. The game begins with a prologue sequence in which Ryu ruminates over the assassination of his father, a ninja battling in the moonlight, before swearing revenge against his killer. And once you complete each level, and sometimes even mid-level, you get to see Ryu's tale of revenge play out in cinematic cutscenes. Now, at the time, Tecmo's marketing said Ninja Gaiden was just like the movie. There was no movie, at least not till later. No, a better point of comparison would really be to manga and anime, which had only just begun to trickle into the US. I gotta say, Ninja Gaiden was a much better video game representation of those mediums than, say, Fist of the North Star. The detailed cutscenes, illustrated by future Chrono Trigger and Chrono Cross director Masato Kato, looked really cool and made Ninja Gaiden unlike any console game before it in the US. Even Phantasy Star's cutscenes felt flimsy compared to Ninja Gaiden. You better believe that a whole lot of NES fans subjected themselves to Ninja Gaiden's hell world design to see those cinematic sequences. And you know what? They were worth it. I have previously described the Guardian Legend as an inverse Blaster Master. You run around and power up on foot, while the vehicular sections allow you to take on the main bosses. But the Guardian Legend is so much better than Blaster Master. For one thing, the power-ups you collect while on foot carry over into the vehicular sequences. Earn a secondary weapon and you can use it in the corridor scenes. Beef up your health on foot and it translates into more energy for the shooting sequences. Everything is unified here, which makes sense because there's actually no divide between hero and vehicle. You control a robot woman named Miria, and Miria has the extremely excellent ability to shift her form into that of a tiny fighter craft. When you enter a corridor, Miria transforms into a spaceship, and her spaceship form has access to all of the boosts and buffs and weapons that she earned on foot. The shooting is extremely good, too. It's tough, sometimes overwhelming, but Miria's RPG-like ability to grow more powerful does a lot to mitigate the difficulty. And the top-down scenes are a little reminiscent of The Legend of Zelda, except much shootier. The Guardian Legend takes place inside a planet-killing artificial world called Naju, and you move from region to region and biome to biome, unlocking paths and working your way toward the final corridor where Naju's control center waits. It's a shooter and an action RPG, and a game about a cool robot girl who's a spaceship. That rules. But if you know me at all, you know there was no question as to what would make the final cut as the best game for NES in 1989. Yes, that's right, it's Mega Man 2, of course. I can't actually untangle my feelings about Mega Man 2 from the way it has hardwired itself into my brain, if we're being honest, and that's okay. A game wouldn't be able to have that much of a hold on me unless it was a genuine masterpiece. I like some bad games, but I don't love them like I love Mega Man 2. Now, some people will tell you that this can't be the best game of any category because it has a few sticking points where the design doesn't seem entirely thought through. I don't know that that option is wrong exactly, but it certainly is uncharitable. We need to evaluate Mega Man 2 in the context of its era, and that context puts it head and shoulders above basically everything else on NES. This is Super Mario caliber work. Immaculately programmed, dripping with great graphics and best-in-class music, presented in a non-linear fashion that makes every session potentially different than the last, unless you get lazy and lock into a favorite boss routine. Mega Man is simply a leap forward in game design that gives the NES some convincing ammunition against the new 16-bit consoles. As in the original Mega Man, you have to conquer 8 different stages ruled by a suitably themed boss whose weapon you can then steal to become your own, permanently. Each weapon has value within the stages and against certain other bosses, and half the fun of Mega Man 2 is working out which weapons work best in a given situation. Each stage has a totally different layout and set of challenges to overcome. It's one of the most replayable games we've seen to this point, and every moment of it, except the Boo Beam Trap, plays brilliantly and looks great, with the best graphics we've seen on NES to date. No, it's not just nostalgia speaking. This game really is the best thing on NES in 1989. So that's that. NES Works 1989 consisted of just shy of 100 games. And that's not including the unlicensed titles that I haven't discussed yet. This list contained just 12 games, a tiny fraction of the whole, the creme de la creme, according to me. So I do want to mention a few games that didn't quite make the final cut. Another Konami conversion that didn't quite make the cut, the NES port of Gyrus, was almost rich enough to count as a sequel, with more patterns, more power-ups, and new gameplay elements. By far the most interesting thing ever created for the Power Pad, Dance Aerobics is one part Proto-Wii Fit, one part Proto-DDR. It's very much a loose outline of those things, but still, it seems to have been wildly ahead of its time. Sokoban Grows Up. The Adventures of Lolo only failed to make the top titles cut because the sequels would turn out to be even better, and I want to give some other games breathing room. Another action RPG, another game with a Sokoban element. Legacy of the Wizard is actually part of the same franchise as Faxanadu, believe it or not, and is the kind of game that you can totally get stuck into, as my British friends would say. Just kidding, I don't actually have any British friends left after dragging all those recent British-made NES games. As for Legacy of the Wizard, it's a little too lumpen and frustrating to quite make the top cut. But as far as NES adaptations of meandering computer adventures go, it sure beats Castle Quest. Yeah, another Konami game that just barely missed the top 10. When did Konami go minor leagues on NES? Damn. I like TMNT a lot, despite its sour reputation, but when you compare it to games like Mega Man 2 or Faxanadu, it just doesn't hit the same heights. Still pretty interesting, albeit crazy unfair. And also a few unlicensed games that are still worth playing. Growing up, the official Nintendo NES release of Tetris was the version of the game I knew best. Loved it, and its vibrant visuals. But now I've played Tengen's illegal version, and while it's profoundly ugly, it offers a lot more than Nintendo's take on the game. They both feel second string compared to the Game Boy version though. I don't know, some games were simply made to be on a specific platform, and I think Tetris might be one of them. Super Sprint might be the single biggest surprise of NES Works 1989. I had zero expectations for it, but it's fast, simple, and a lot of fun. A fantastic NES adaptation of an arcade game with roots in the mid-70s. It doesn't look like much, but it's totally addictive. And finally, the NES port of Rolling Thunder falls just shy of making the cut. Luckily for developer Arc System Works, they have a very similar, one might say suspiciously similar, 1990 release that stands a reasonable chance of making that year's top 12. Next time on NES Works, the inevitable counterpoint.